Welcome, everyone. My name is David Benjamin. I am the facilitator of the Meta-Layer Infrastructure SIG. We are building a trust layer above the web. With me here today is our vice facilitator, Michelle Tho.
Yeah, here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So we'll start with the problems of today's web and things we all experience every single day online. And then we'll step back and look at how we got here. Because the history really shows us what went wrong. And from there, we'll introduce what the meta layer is and how it works. And afterwards, we'll also go through a demo, look at some real world use cases, and finally wrap things up with a Q&A so that you can share your thoughts and questions. Let's begin with the challenges. Today's internet has some serious trust issues and security gaps, and there's AI generated content everywhere and making it harder and harder to know if you are engaging with a real person or a bot. And also the trust signals are weak or missing, making hence privacy is constantly under threat. And of course, misinformation spreads faster than the truth. And on top of that, companies are exploiting um, our data on a massive scale. And to be honest, these issues aren't just annoying, but they are systematic problems that impact our personal safety, societies, and even democracy. So now let's talk about the fragmentation. Today's web is fragmented by design, and every platform is its own little walled garden. And of course, you can sign up for an account, create a profile, build connections. But then when you move to the next platform, you have to like start all over again. And instead of collaboration, what we get is dozens of separate logins, addictive feeds designed to keep us scrolling, and an endless flood of false or misleading information. And the truth is, the web we have today was built for profit and attention, not for wisdom or human connection. Next slide, please. And here's the bigger picture. We live in a world surrounded by information, but much of it is shallow, deceptive, or even just out of context. And this undermines public trust, weakens democracies, and limits inclusive digital economies. And notice these aren't just technical issues, but also governance issues in that they affect how we live together online, how we make decisions as societies, and how inclusive or exclusive our digital world becomes. And that's why fixing these problems requires more than just another app, and it requires a new layer for the internet. Over to you, David.
Are there any questions that anyone has or any reflections or comments that people might want to make about the problems of the internet before we move on?
Just that every single thing that was presented is true. I mean, seriously, it's just so broken. So this is really great that it's organized this way.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a quiz. In 2012, an Internet Insider said the web has a big missing feature. And this missing feature, it was in the web before the web was even the web. It was talked about or implied in the 1945 article by Vannevar Bush, As We May Think. It was in the Mother of All Demos explicitly. This is the Douglas Engelbart event where he showcased many things that we now use in modern computing, including the mouse and video conferencing, et cetera. This thing was in it at then as well. And it was also in ARPANET. And it was in Tim Berners-Lee's proposal to CERN. It was in this first web browser, Mosaic, but it was removed from Mosaic in 1995. Well, it was moved from Netscape actually, which was the successor of Mosaic in 1995. Why? Because Internet Explorer was being preloaded on all Windows machines, which was the vast majority of machines, about 90% at that time. And they didn't have a place to store the information that came out of this big information, this big missing feature. So does anyone have any idea what that big missing feature is? Annotation. And it's not surprising. Annotation was actually, as we see here, we started working with it in 1993 with the web, but it's actually been part of the human corpus since around 1000, around the first millennia. Um, and this is from, I believe, either the Talmud or one of these other older texts. But this was how people would comment on things. And since the web is a book metaphor, it makes sense if we were writing in the margins of books for over 1,000 years, that it makes sense that we would have annotation on the web. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Well, the interesting thing, like I said, it got pulled out in 1995, and that in 2012, when Mark Andreessen, who is the founder of Mosaic, co-founder of Netscape, when he did the investment in Rap Genius, he was saying that annotation was one of the main reasons they did that. He wanted to bring back the ability to layer knowledge on top of knowledge. And uh, he also said something that I thought was so profound. He said, I often wonder what the web would be like right now if we hadn't had to essentially pull out the ability of layering knowledge on top of knowledge in 1995. We are exploring that. We think the big missing feature is all the space above the web. There is space above web content. The internet can have as many layers as it wants. This can be a cooperative, people-centered, community-governed, civic layer that enables trust, context, and visibility. This is the big missing feature of the web, in our opinion. Annotation is definitely part of that. The annotation happens in this layer. So Mark Andreessen was not wrong, but we're just enlarging the scope of it.
Um, so, uh, so what is the meta-layer? And in simple terms, it's a transparent, decentralized overlay that sits above any web page. And what does it do? It can identify bots and synthetic content. It enables trust signals like fact checks directly on the web page, and it gives users control over their privacy and visibility. And most importantly, it ensures that not only real humans are, it ensures that only real humans affect virality. And the meta-layer is not just about technology, it's about creating an internet that's smarter, more human-centered, and of course, safer for everyone. Yeah, over to you, David.
I like to think of this as a web cake. I mean, this is just a metaphor, the cake metaphor for the web. And the idea here is, well, with cakes, you can have as many layers as you want. I mean, I've heard of wedding cakes that have 17 layers. But the interesting thing is, back in the 1800s in Europe, if you had went into a bakery and asked for a cake, they would have only shown you one layer cakes because that's all there was at that time. And if you had said, I want a wedding cake, they would have brought you a big cake with some dolls on top, but it wouldn't have multiple layers because that wasn't in the concept of what a cake was at the time. That's where we are with the web right now. We're at this bottom layer, the content, and we think that's all it is. I mean, some people realize that annotation exists. There's Hypothesis and Digo, and I think there's probably a handful of other annotation plugins. And then there is Web3 as well. So Web3 wallets sit above web pages. The thing about the Web3 wallets, though, as they are currently implemented, they only work for the distributed applications that they're set up for. So maybe there's 10,000 web pages. There's another trillion or 2 trillion web pages that Web3 doesn't work on right now. So with the web, with the meta web, you have not only have annotation and Web3 wallets over any web page, but you also have computation. So that means that you can have interactions above the web page. What is an interaction? Well, interaction could be a conversation, it could be a poll, it could be any type of interaction that you do today on the content level. You can have similar things on in the meta layer. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions before we move on? Prince?
May we return to the previous slide and pause on it for one moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome. This is just another way. We've been experimenting with different ways to show what the meta layer is. And I actually got a graphic similar to this from Hypothesis. Like I said, they have an annotation tool. So they had made a graphic that kind of gave me this idea. But here's the deal, right? You've got a website, a PDF, even an ebook potentially. And the space above it is the meta web. And this could be composed of many different things. It's showing them as different layers. They aren't really technically different layers, but the point here is that people can have a presence, information can have a presence, interactions can have a presence, and entire communities can have a presence above the web page. And so this is the notion that if you went to a particular web page, you could see who in your community happens to be on that web page at that same time. And we're going to now take a look at that. Well, actually, we will be taking a look at that. Not quite this moment, though. Wanted to just step back because we talked about how we got where we are from the standpoint of the big missing feature of the web, but let's also talk about how we got where we are with respect to the meta layer. So the foundational thought around it comes from actually the trivium, which is from ancient Greece, which essentially is a three-layer pyramid with wisdom at the top, understanding in the middle, and knowledge at the bottom. And that basically says you need to have if you want to be wise, you have to have really good understanding. And if you want to have a good understanding, you have to have a great knowledge base. We don't have a great knowledge base. And this really focused us on, well, how do we make the knowledge base better? And then collective computing from Douglas Engelbart, the web as a book metaphor, the annotation layer, these are all foundational to the web, to the meta web. Early overlay systems include Hypothesis, Digo, and Memex. And now there are other types of extensions that live above the web, including Honey. I know it's actually not a great thing at all, but it's very popular. So I mentioned here, Grammarly is another example, password managers. Then you have the Web3, MetaMask, and other types of overlays and wallets for Web3. The next set is the innovations that Bridget brought to the table. Bridget is the organization that I started about 7 years ago, and we push forward the idea of an internet of ideas. We came up with the concept of bridges that have semantic relationships between two pieces of data. We added in this idea of attention triggering. so that you don't have to face overwhelm when you're in the meta layer, and focus-driven attention. So being able to actually um, focus on something, find out the different options for where you can go, and then travel to that other place without ever using search. And this just builds upon the bridges. Uh, the next step was the meta web and the overweb. The pillars are safe digital space, on-page presence, and on-page interactions. We wrote the book, The Meta Web, The Next Level of the Internet, and published it in 2023. And then I guess probably starting a little bit before the book, we started implementing presence and finished it around the time of the book. We unfortunately lost control of that code. That's just what happened. But we do have a demo of the Canopy SDK, and we had an extension. This shows meta communities that travel with you wherever you go, page level chat with a visible list. And also we implemented a first level of smart tags with the extension. And now when we look at the stack of the meta layer, we think of a composable rules engine, federated strong authentication. So that means that if you have already got an account with Nostr or at protocol or one of these other um, platforms that give you a strong authentication set of keys, then you would be able to do the first level of authentication with the meta layer, as opposed to us creating our own authentication. We want to work with the existing platforms and allow people to plug in that way. We're also been pushing the envelope with trusted execution environments, and we are looking to create a substrate that's going to enable all kinds of devices, including mobile phones, desktops, laptops, etc. So let's do the Canopy demo. I'm going to break out of here for a second and go to this page. We will start up Canopy. So right now, I'm using what's called a bookmarklet, and you can see that we're on the Internet Society page about a trustworthy internet. And we now have this option at the bottom of the page in the lower right that we can click, and it opens up a sidebar. Let me go ahead and log in. And so the first thing to know is that you can pick what communities that you want to be active in. So let's say I want to be active in the regenerative one and the ISOC one. And then I can go look and see if there are any people within any of the communities that I'm active in that happen to be on this page. And you can see here that Jean Junior Tussaud in France is active on this page. He's been here since 5 hours ago. And if we look here, we can see that there's actually a conversation that started September 22nd, so 5 days ago. And it was just me kind of sounding off. And I'm just talking about here on the page. In my humble opinion, secure and trustworthy internet is everything. And unfortunately, if only building in silos, it will be impossible to create a trustworthy internet. One new trustworthy and secure silo will never a trustworthy and secure internet make. I assure you of this. So I'm just talking, but I am talking about what's on this page. And normally this comment would be somewhere else. It might be on Facebook, it might be on LinkedIn, but it wouldn't be here where the page is. And so later on, a couple of days later, John Jr. came and he said, well, you make a really strong point. One more secure silo on its own doesn't magically make the internet trustworthy. It just adds another walled garden. What seems missing is something that can work across silos, a way to make trust and accountability visible wherever people are online, not just inside one protocol or platform. It feels like the real challenge is how to connect all these efforts without centralizing control again. How do you think we could start weaving trust across silos in a way that scales? And so then I answer. And the real point here is that we can have contextual conversations, and we can have our conversations exactly where the content is. They can be private, they can be specific to communities, and in this way, we are using the meta layer to make the web more interactive, more interesting, and more contextual. And just imagine this. So I know who John Jr. is. So if he was on the, let's say he hadn't um, done anything in the live chat and I saw him here, I could go ahead and click through and send him a message and say, hi. Basically, I see you're on the page. Let's talk about it. So this is a way to have serendipitous encounters. And you can also imagine that maybe I don't know him, and I come here and there would be a headline just like on LinkedIn that says John Jr., cybersecurity student living in France, uh, very excited about trust and safety on the web. And even if I didn't know him, just seeing this, I could say, oh, you know what? This guy, he seems really on top of it. He's looking at the same thing that I'm looking at. Maybe I should add him as a friend. Any questions about this demo?
It's a good demo, Debbie. The web, the whole friction and the long term, I think, reason the concept hasn't been well developed is maybe because, I mean, you're forming a solid business model now, but the web page builders, the owners of them, I could they feel hijacked for some reason. But if there's a whole group of and the web page publishers that's a huge business, right? But I would opt out for web page publishing for secure communication and like I have a quick question though, like tools like Hypothesis, let's say, how do you vet? You might come to this at some point, but when you've got a whole community that is bought in, right? We want this platform. And then at that point though, how do you assess the vetting, of allowing people to come in? And I'm sure it's this 2-3 form of identification, but I mean, I think that once the community builds in numbers to have this happen, that the force of the volume of that community will turn out to be, make this successful, right? What are your thoughts of that? I don't know. This is what came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can bring entire communities on at the same time by adopting specific uh, authentication, uh, basically supporting different platforms
Right.
that have their own strong authentication methods.
Well,
And
just
the
like research and academia have their closed loop systems, this is just making it more available to the wider community. It's just that intersection of trust and vetting and making sure people get in. And of course, there's going to be, criticism of that assessment of who gets in and who stays, who gets blocked out. I mean, I would prefer to try to get in, but like,
Right.
your sandbox. I want your sandbox because it would make my life easier.
Yeah, I would. I think there's one scenario where we don't handle the actual community. There's already an existing community, and we just support whatever authentication method that they're using. So it could be, let's say it's a research website and that aggregates different researchers and professors that are working on, science and technology. We could, as the meta layer, um, enable through our substrate whatever the OAuth method that they are using, the single sign-on method.
Yeah.
And we can cover a number of different ones. And then that would enable them to essentially continue managing who's in the community, who's not in the community. But the meta layer in that scenario would simply be allowing that community, which normally operates in a silo, to
Yeah.
operate over the
Yeah.
entire
Oh,
web.
very good explanation. Thank you. Awesome. That makes sense. Yes.
All right, let's jump back in here. So we showed the visible list, we showed the chat, the live chat. We also showed meta communities, friending, messages, etc. Michelle, where are we in terms of the slides? Is this one of the ones you were going to take, or?
It's not that one.
Oh, okay.
It's the next one.
Okay, I thought it was coming up based on the numbers. Use cases, there are many, many different use cases for this type of technology. So many that I can't even think of all of them right now. No one could. It's very expansive because we're essentially saying there's a layer on top of the web, and we're creating a substrate that will allow anyone to create applications and tags and communities that are active over the entire web. But we're not saying that you can or can't do anything with a specific tag or with an application. You might have some code already that's great information and interactions. We want to help you essentially expand that application data and interaction set to the entire web so that your application is now not only available in the silo, but it's available above any web page that it makes sense to be available on. Because there are so many different types of use cases, I just thought that we'd talk about one class of use cases, which is really, I call them meta communities. They're communities that live across the web. Uh, and in particular, you can organize them geographically, topically, even events. We think it pretty interesting. But just imagine a European layer where everybody who has access to that layer is from the European Union. Wouldn't that be useful? Or a Pan-African layer, an Indian layer. These are very possible, but maybe you want to do something much smaller. Could be a city layer, could even be a neighborhood layer. Or there's all kinds of topics that people would want to have conversations about and to be in community about. We're already talking, well, in not only talking, but we've been working behind the scenes with a group called Athletes for Data Sovereignty. And they're super excited. They're already starting to organize about having their own layer above the web. There's also this notion of a decentralized intelligence agency. This is something that's come up because there are so many internet sleuths out there these days, and they're actively helping solve crimes. A lot of this is happening on YouTube, but also on Reddit and other places as well. Wouldn't it be cool for internet sleuths to be able to be on the web together and share information? a diabetes layer or some other health challenge. These people need to be able to talk to each other. They need to be able to understand what's working for other people that have the similar ailments. So having a layer of their own where when they go to a page about specific foods, they can see other people in their communities, they can have conversations. It could be really valuable. Events. You know, it's classic with events, right? You go to an event, get completely fired up because you meet all these really cool people, you hear great talks, and you might even have some conversations where you say, yeah, we should work together on this, or we collaborate on this, or let's talk about this later on. And at least for me, a lot of that doesn't materialize. I mean, yeah, sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. Just imagine if everybody who went to the event was in a layer over the web. So now when you go to a particular web page, something that you're interested in, you could actually see the people who were also at the event that you shared in common. So not only do you share that you're looking at the same thing, but you also have gone through that same experience of being at the event. Maybe you have a conversation. Maybe there's a conversation that wants to be had.
Imagine what this looks like in practice. Every web page becomes a space for real social interaction and collaboration. Identities are verified, which means fewer trolls and bots. And human-centered AI assistants work only with your permission and guidance so as to avoid the current issue we are facing with over-censorship with today's AI systems. And users actually own their data with a digital bill of rights guaranteeing privacy, safety, and freedom of speech. And that's the safest matter internet you are building with the Meta-Layer. The next slide, please. Hello.
Yep. Do you not see
Next
the
slide.
next slide? It should
Pardon?
be up.
Okay.
It should be up. I see it. Do other people see the next slide? Why the meta layer matters?
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh yeah, I've now seen it. I guess it's my network. So yeah, why does this matter? And it's because it directly addresses the most urgent problems of today's internet, and it stops scams before they reach people. It neutralizes fake news by attaching fact checks directly to content. It protects us from hidden algorithmic manipulation, and it ends abuse by eliminating fake accounts and ensuring accountability across platforms. And on top of that, it shifts the system from rewarding clicks to rewarding real contributions, helping communities build collective intelligence together. Over to you, David.
Okay. I guess we're at a point where we're going to go into the SIG, but before we do that, I'd love to get any comments, reflections, questions. Okay, moving right along. Well, let's talk about internet standards and governance. And I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, but I do understand it a bit. From my research, it appears that on the protocol layer, you have IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force. This is an organization that works under the umbrella of the Internet Society. You also have the W3C, which was started by Tim Berners-Lee. And you also have DWeb. So DWeb is the decentralized web. These are the folks that are associated with the Internet Archive, and they tend to gravitate towards solutions and protocols that allow decentralized messaging and communications. But none of these do much in the meta-layer governance. Some of them do things in the interface. The WC3 does a fair amount of work in the actual interface. But when it comes to the meta-layer, they've done an annotation standard, which is great. But I show it faded out here because it's not a big focus of theirs. The space above the web page is not something that they talk about. And the annotation standard, which was pushed through by Hypothesis in 2017, it hasn't been adopted by any of the browsers yet. I think they should, but they just haven't. And so what this means is, for the most part, the meta layer governance and standards aren't really being addressed on an active basis, except for, well, that's why we want to step in and work on these. And we'll also work on interface standards as well. But this is the piece, the missing piece that the Meta-Layer Infrastructure SIG can fulfill. So this SIG will change the web experience. This is the opportunity for you to be part of an intergenerational movement for a safe, privacy-first, and trustworthy internet. We have made a commitment that half of the board members will always be 25 or less, because we see this as, you know, something that's really important for young people. They're the ones who are going to be living with these systems the longest. So we're intent on making sure that they have the opportunity to help shape this from the very beginning. And Michelle is a great example of that. You're 23 years old, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm 23.
So she's a 23-year-old coder from Kenya. And we also have Maxwell from Kenya as well. And then we have John Jr., and he's in France. So all three of them are younger than 25 years old. And we have that commitment in place to make sure that their cohort always has a voice in the meta layer. And as I said earlier, as I went over, we are addressing gaps in internet standards and governance. The Meta-Layer SIG will be the governing body of the Meta-Layer initiative, which is an ongoing concern. We've been working on the Meta-Layer initiative since last September, when we did a kickoff meeting with Vince Cerf, was our featured speaker, and he challenged us to define the desirable properties of a meta layer and write an essay on that. So the mandate of this SIG is to co-create for the meta layer the governance, terminology, ontology, desirable properties, a substrate. So this is actually code, and pilots to run that code. We want to do all of that in 2 years. The idea here is to actually sunset this SIG. This SIG will only last 2 years and transition into the meta layer task force. So it would be essentially a task force for the governance and standards of the meta layer. We are adopting a governance model that is used by the IETF. It's draft to RFC, so anyone can submit a draft. Once it gets a certain amount of support, it can be turned into a RFC, or request for comments. And at that point, it will go through a process. And if there is a rough consensus, then it will be approved and become part of the standards corpus that we're building for the meta layer. If you want to find out more, you can click this QR code to not click it, but scan the QR code. And then I want to just talk a little bit about how to get involved with the first thing. If you're not an Internet Society member, you've got to do that. That's part of it. And then we're really hoping that everyone is going to vote for the SIG in the vote that happens between October 17th and 31st so that we can be officially approved as a SIG of the Internet Society. The next step would be to learn about the draft to RFC process and to submit drafts and comment on drafts and RFCs. Any idea that you have about the Meta-Layer is fair game. You can write it up as a draft, submit it. You'll get comments from people and hopefully revise it. And when it gets approved to become an RFC, it will then go into the official decision-making process to see if it gets approved.